Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me start by saying that I'm not surprised, but I'm kind of disappointed that our motion to divide the question failed earlier, because like a lot of people in this room, there are parts of the bill that I very much am in favor of, and then there are some other parts that I might disagree with, but I would have liked to have the opportunity at least to be able to show what I supported and what I did not. Like everyone in this chamber, I grieve for the families of those lost in Newtown, and I'm going to spend a large amount of time talking about the parts of this bill that I dislike, and as a result, I don't want anyone to take that to diminish my sentiment in any way. It's just that I do not believe that some parts of this bill would necessarily make the world a safer place or would have done anything to prevent that tragedy or any future tragedy. Briefly, I believe that the consensus items that came out of the School Security Subcommittee and also the Mental Health Subcommittees are worthy. I don't think we had a lot of time to delve into those matters as thoroughly as I would have liked to, and I think we could have come up with far better results had we actually had a little bit more time, but I do believe they are worthy of going forward, and I do support them. Do I think they're going to change the face of the world, or even Connecticut? No, I don't think so. But I do think that they are a step in the right direction, and I do support those ideas going forward. There is a section in the bill that attempts to modify the risk reduction credit program, which we all know as the early release program for violent felons. And I applaud the effort there to make some changes to tighten up that program, but I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit more before I get to the end as well. And that brings me to the part of the bill that I do have a problem with, and that is the numerous gun control proposals that are contained in one of the sections of the bill. I don't oppose every item that is listed as far as gun control. My issue really comes down to the bans and restrictions and requirements for additional certification and fees that would be borne by law-abiding citizens who have done nothing wrong and don't deserve to have their world changed because of what happened on December 14th. My test really for whether an idea in this bill or any particular piece of it is worthy is whether or not it would have made any difference on December 14th, first of all, and failing that, would it do anything to potentially reduce acts of violence in the future in any other way? And of course, anything that meets those two tests, I would certainly support, as long as it does not impact on the freedoms of law-abiding citizens. Unfortunately, I think there's many items that are contained in the underlying bill that do indeed fail that. I have often said in this chamber on lots of different issues that I measure whether or not I can support a bill based on whether or not it's going to negatively impact any single individual. And I feel like there are quite a few single individuals that are going to be impacted by this proposed bill. I want to make a side note here to anyone who is listening here or watching who is unconcerned about the impact to the many law-abiding gun owners in our state about what's going to happen in this legislation. And that is that we're going to meet many, many times in the future, and we're going to pass many, many more laws. And I would consider that someday it might be something that is just as important to you as these issues are to those people that might be at stake. Throughout our history, even the history of all mankind, many a wise man has made the observation that any trade-off of freedom for safety is a foolish one. You can go online and you can look up quote after quote from our founding fathers talking about this exact issue. And I want to just bring one to your attention, and it's something Daniel Webster said. It is hardly too strong to say that the Constitution was made to guard the people against the dangers of good intentions. Excuse me, Mr. Speaker. I understand the desire by many people in and out of this room to come up with just that sort of balance. My concern is that I think the bill before us is absolutely going to curtail those freedoms that I just mentioned, but not necessarily provide any additional safety. Our job here in the legislature is simply to make laws. That's what we do. Unfortunately, laws by themselves mean very little. Laws, to be effective, they need to be respected, they need to be obeyed, and finally, as my good colleague in front of me, Dr. Srinivasan, just mentioned, they need to be enforced. And I want to talk about these three issues briefly. To be respected, laws need to be fair and they need to be just. So what makes a law just as opposed to unjust? Well, an example of an unjust law would be one that unfairly targets a minority, but is applied with the force of the majority. Something that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about regularly. For Americans, the Bill of Rights is a measure of what is a just versus an unjust law. Its express purpose is to protect the rights of individuals, not just from the majority, but also from the good intentions that Daniel Webster spoke about. This brings me to the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is not a new idea. It existed long before our founding documents. Immediately preceding our Revolutionary War, there was a Virginia Declaration of Rights that contained the same language. Before that, there was an English Bill of Rights that included the same language and was designed to protect the members of Parliament and from the monarch, the King of Britain at the time. In Federalist 46, which was written by James Madison, one of our founders, and certainly a man who had a lot of input in our founding documents, our Constitution, and our Bill of Rights, he speaks at great length of what the purpose of the Second Amendment is. And he talks about how Americans have huge advantages because their citizens are armed, both for our common defense and that we would be in a position to preserve our own freedoms in the case of any tyranny. Back in, I think, early March, nearly 2,000 Connecticut citizens came to this Capitol to remind us of the importance of their Second Amendment rights, and also to let us know that they didn't want to be subjects. Now, unfortunately, these people faced a very cold reception. And I mean that literally, because they were forced to stand outside for upwards of 2 hours in a snowstorm because they had to go through metal detectors. Something that has never been done before or since. And something that just adds to what I perceive some of the intentions of this bill, which is to provide a little additional stigma to law-abiding gun owners. That somehow, I'll get to that later. When these folks came to testify, of course, they testified about their concerns about their Second Amendment freedoms. And they talked about our history, their concerns about gun registration, gun confiscation, and everything else that they saw as a potential law that could come down from this body. Mostly because they did not have an actual bill to review, but merely they were told that the subject matter was gun control. But one of the things that they repeatedly said, and I found compelling because many colleagues and other people that I spoke to found it amazing that people would come and actually say that people were upset because they thought their government was becoming too oppressive. The Revolutionary War occurred precisely because of an oppressive government, namely the British King. It began because the British intended to confiscate the arms of American colonists at Concord, Massachusetts. Does anyone here remember the shot heard round the world that we heard about in grade school? Well, that's what it was about. That was our forefathers using their arms to defend their own liberties against an unjust and oppressive government. That war was won, and we have the freedoms that we cherish today because they were armed, and they could not be defeated by the most powerful army and navy the world had seen at that time. So, free citizens rebelling against an oppressive government and establishing a government of their own that protects those freedoms is, in fact, our legacy. And I don't think it's anything that should be mocked when people come to remind us of that. So after the Revolutionary War, of course, our founders got together and they drafted the Constitution, and they did this with all of these facts in mind. So it's no surprise that the Second Amendment shows up in the Bill of Rights, where it does, in fact, right after the First Amendment that guarantees our most basic freedoms of religion and speech. The Second Amendment is there to guard against and protect that list of freedoms in itself. And it's also no surprise that the Second Amendment says, shall not be infringed. Do I have to remind anyone what the meaning of infringed is? I bet if I was to infringe upon your property or your ability to speak your mind in this room, I think you might come to remember what that means rather quickly. The Second Amendment is critical to what makes us Americans. We went from being subjects to a king to becoming kings of ourselves. We have the right to own property, to defend it if necessary, and to choose our own paths in life. And the Second Amendment is vital to preserving these rights. Since this all started, I wondered to myself whether or not the Connecticut General Assembly, us in this room and the Senate as well, even have the power to change either our Constitution or the Connecticut Constitution in the manner that we're going about it. Or, I'm sorry, the U.S. Constitution. We all took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution against those who would seek to abolish or alter it. I think even the Connecticut Constitution would require something more than a vote, a mere majority vote in this body, possibly a constitutional amendment. For those that say the Second Amendment or Article 1, Section 15 of our Connecticut Constitution is an outdated law, I want to remind them that we just ratified our state constitution in 1965, hardly a very long time ago in societal terms, and that we could have had a constitutional convention in Connecticut in just 2008. And, of course, it was voted down by the people of Connecticut. Are we supposedly smarter than our founding fathers, or our colleagues in 1965, or the people of Connecticut just a few short years ago? I know that there's a lot of rumors about whether or not there would be a legal challenge to this legislation, and I'm quite confident that there will be. And I hope that there is, and I think that there should be. My good friend, Representative, I think it was Mikatel over there, brought up the Heller versus D.C. decision, which I'm not going to rehash. I have some notes on it. But he made the very, very important point that this has all been done before. And in Heller, they determined that weapons that are in common use cannot be banned. And I believe that the legislation that we have before us seeks to ban many, many things that are in common use and would fail that test. There's also a Supreme Court decision that says that gun control cannot be legislated for the purpose of suppressing gun ownership, only for the action of fighting crime. And I truly believe that the legislation before us does indeed have the desire of suppressing gun ownership. I want to mention one other case, and that's McDonald versus Chicago. And this is a case where the city of Chicago tried to deprive their citizens of their Second Amendment liberties. And in the end, they lost. They went to the Supreme Court, and they lost, and they appealed, and they lost again. But what was interesting is that they had to pay damages to the tune of $1.4 million for their loss. So I would submit that we might, in fact, by putting forth this legislation, be risking taxpayer dollars of the citizens of our state to defend it in court. I'm going to move on to the second thing that I mentioned, which is that laws need to be obeyed. I'm sure everyone in this room has received countless emails with the term law-abiding citizens. I've heard it mentioned in here quite a few times. These are the people that I am here speaking on behalf of today. There is something sinister about proposals that seem to imply that anyone who legally owns a gun is simply a criminal in waiting. I've heard it said countless times how the Sandy Hook killer was a perfectly good law-abiding citizen right up until he did what he did. A more ridiculous statement could not be uttered, except possibly that somehow these gun control laws are going to make our world safer. I equate this to some maniac driving down the road at 100 miles an hour, and we have a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, and the answer is to reduce the speed limit to 20 miles an hour. These laws will only be obeyed by people who choose to obey them. That, by definition, is a law-abiding citizen. Criminals will still have their guns and their magazines, and they will still commit their crimes, unless, of course, we start doing some things that we should be doing, which I will get to before I am done here. We are allegedly here to stop another mass murderer. The truth is that the Sandy Hook killer committed countless crimes on December 14th. He stole guns. He possessed a handgun under age 21. Then he shot and killed his own mother. Then he transported loaded guns, brought these onto school property. I know, some of these are big, some of these are small. But then he forcibly broke into the school. He discharged his weapon within city limits. And then he murdered 26 innocent people and finally committed suicide. Do we really think that adding any more laws to our books would have stopped him? Expanding bans on guns or magazines certainly will not. Let me talk about magazines for a second. To change a magazine in a handgun or a rifle takes about 2 seconds. And I would bet that crazed maniacs who plan on mass murder practice a lot so they can do it a lot faster than that. Even if you ban and confiscate every what you call high-capacity magazines, the criminals will still have them. They will make them. After all, it's just a plastic box with a spring in it. It's hardly a complicated thing. Or they will buy them out of state, or they will use fertilizer, or they will use airplanes, or any other thing that might have been used in any type of act of evil like this in the past, or they'll just use 10-round magazines. And the reason why I bring that up is because the largest and single most deadly mass murder involving firearms occurred at Virginia Tech in 2007. The killer killed 32 people and wounded 17 others. And he used a .22 caliber pistol with 10-round magazines, which is not banned under this proposed bill. As I said, a magazine change takes just a couple of seconds. It's not enough time to rush an attacker. At Virginia Tech, the victims were college kids. I mean, if there was ever a chance where people could rush an attacker and stop them, I think it would have been there. The only result of limiting the size of magazines is that innocent, law-abiding citizens will not have them. They will foolishly obey the law. And the only result of that is that the decent, law-abiding father, who is someday going to have to defend his family against attackers, is going to be at a disadvantage. The criminal or criminals, as Representative Adinolfi pointed out, because you don't know what's going to happen, they certainly are going to have whatever armament they choose to have. The sad truth is that this father is the first responder. I mean, there are many, many good law enforcement officers in our society, but they will tell you themselves that they typically show up after the incident is over. Banning magazines is not going to prevent any future acts of violence or make someone stop being evil. I want to talk about the assault weapons section for a second. What exactly does prohibiting the sale of a firearm that has an adjustable stock, or a pistol grip, or a barrel shroud, or a flash hider accomplish? You notice I didn't answer because everybody knows the answer is nothing. It doesn't make the gun any more dangerous. These are purely cosmetic features. The federal assault weapons ban was in effect for 10 years. It had almost no results. In fact, there are plenty of studies have shown that the violent crime rate actually went down when it ended. Let me go back to something really quick. The fact is that, as I said, these are just cosmetic features. But this reminded me of something, and that is that I get lots and lots of emails from people that tend to say that these semi-automatic assault weapons spray bullets. So let me just explain what semi-automatic is here for a second. A semi-automatic weapon is one that fires one bullet at a time. You have to pull the trigger every time to make it fire. And it bugs me when I get these emails from people saying that these guns spray bullets, because I believe they are being purposely misinformed. They are being hoodwinked into thinking that we are banning machine guns, and the fact is that machine guns have been banned for a long, long time. Basically, all guns are semi-automatic. I mean, there might be some exceptions, but virtually every gun any one of us have ever seen or run into is a semi-automatic firearm. The AR-15 itself, I think the issue there, or the Bushmaster, the issue there is that it looks scary. But I want to tell you, it functions just like Granddad's gun that was hanging over his mantle or his fireplace. The only difference is how it looks. It's a modern rifle. I mean, if you go back to the 50s, cars had chrome bumpers and fins. You know? They don't have that anymore. Today, cars are rounded, sleek, they have body color bumpers. And much like that, technology has advanced in the firearm industry too, and they use plastic parts, because if you're going hunting and you're going to carry around a wooden rifle all day, it's heavy. But the fact is, like I said, cosmetic issues only. These types of rifles are owned by decent, law-abiding citizens all across our country, and there are, I don't know how many, hundreds of thousands of them probably in our state. They are used for shooting targets, other types of shooting sports, hunting, high school students who shoot targets and belong to leagues, even teenage boys and girls who represent us in the Olympics. Guns are just tools. I bet you a lot of you guys have seen studies that show that more murders have been committed with hammers than assault weapons. So I wonder why we're not banning hammers. I started talking about how laws need to be just, and that they need to be obeyed, and that they finally need to be enforced. So why aren't we enforcing the laws that we do have? Since before December 14th, there are many of us who have been clamoring for more law and order. In fact, I would submit that the best part of this entire bill are the changes made to restore some sense of sanity by getting rid of parts of the early release program, because I believe this might actually stop some crime. Banning rifles of any type makes no sense. Rifles are just not typically used in violent crime or murder. In fact, I have had people tell me that you are more likely to be struck by lightning than to get shot by a rifle in Connecticut. And as a matter of fact, I looked up the FBI statistics to figure that out for myself, and it turns out that in the 10-year period between 2001 and 2011, there were 4 murders committed with a rifle in Connecticut. 4. What's interesting, though, is that there were 64 murders committed by people with no weapon at all. Maybe we should ban hands. Banning magazines is just as fruitless. There are millions of them in existence. They have no serial numbers, and I said they are just very, very simply made and designed. It's just a plastic box with a spring. The technology exists to make them on a 3D printer in minutes. And the bottom line is that criminals are not going to turn them in. Are we going to send police to the homes of otherwise law-abiding citizens to confiscate these magazines? I want to finish by talking about what we should be doing. We should be concentrating on making our schools more secure. We should be working on how we treat mental illness. We should be repealing the early release program. We should be restoring the death penalty. And we should be enforcing our existing laws. There are quite a few OLR reports that came out over the past month, and I really wish that I had the time to have put them together, because I will tell you that even a quick glance will tell you that the whole story is that we do not enforce our existing laws. There are repeat criminals on the street committing crimes of violence every day, and we are not putting them in prison. Why are we not concentrating on protecting our criminals, or our citizens from criminals, rather? We're supposedly here discussing this legislation because of the events in Newtown. The problem is that it has little to do with laws or our ability or desire to protect anyone in our society. We all have that. We are here today because of the acts of an evil person. It's not about an evil gun or even an unsafe school. I really don't even know that you can stop an evil person. You think prior to 9/11, no one would have ever considered that you could have used a commercial airplane as a missile. And I think prior to the Oklahoma City bombing, no one would have thought that you could buy fertilizer and use that to blow up a federal building. Of course, none of this means that we shouldn't try to make the world safer. We should absolutely try to make the world more safe for our citizens. The problem is that the gun control measures that are contained in this bill just don't do that. I keep hearing the term gun violence, but when you talk about gun violence, ask any person on the street, they will tell you that that means violence that happens in the cities by repeat criminals using handguns, which is something that's like almost not addressed at all in any of this. And I maintain that's where our focus should be. We should do our best to keep guns away from those that are potentially dangerous or don't have the proper faculties to safely handle a firearm. We should keep criminals in prison. I know I said it before. I want to keep saying it. I'll support those kind of measures if they come before me, but I am not going to support anything that is going to adversely impact law-abiding citizens in a negative way. I am opposed to this bill, Mr. Speaker, not because I am not interested in the few good things it does, but because I cannot support any effort to weaken our state or U.S. constitutions in the name of achieving something this bill will have little to no effect upon. I am not here defending guns. This debate, as I said, is not about guns or even about laws about guns. It is about freedom. Someone once said that we only have the rights we are willing to fight for. And I know that there are many thousands of law-abiding gun owners in this state who do not deserve to have their rights trampled because of the acts of some maniac, and I stand by them. So, Mr. Speaker, with all of this in mind, I have an amendment. It is LCO 5456. I would ask that you call it and give me leave to summarize.
Will the clerk please call LCO number 5456. The representative has asked leave of the chamber to summarize. This will be designated House Amendment B.
House Amendment B, Senate Bill 1160, LCO 5456, offered by Representative Sampson and Senator Markey.
Gentleman has asked leave of the chamber to summarize. Sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Forgive me, I'm a little parched. So a few folks will bear with me for just a second. This particular amendment contains much of the underlying bill. As I said from the outset, I am in favor of a great many parts that are in the underlying bill, including the parts that surround the mental health subcommittee recommendations and the school security subcommittee recommendations. The one change that I have made to either one of those sections is that within the school security language, there is a provision in there to increase the amount of the grants available in the School Security Infrastructure Competitive Grant Program. And that's going from $3 million to $15 million, and that's in the underlying bill. I'm not changing that in any way, shape, or form. The other change that happens is that the list of items that are eligible to apply for the grant for is being increased as well. But I found one omission there that I thought needed to be corrected, and that is school resource officers. So my amendment... Understood. This amendment includes the provision to make school resource officers part of that list of items that can be applied for by municipalities. And Mr. Speaker, forgive me, but my colleague to my right just reminded me that I should move adoption, so I would like to do that.
Yes. The question before the chamber is on adoption. Will you remark, sir?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I continue on, so that takes care of the mental health part and also the school security part. With regard to early release, I've only had a brief opportunity to review what is in the underlying bill as far as the early release program goes. But my concern is that we're not going far enough. I have real problems with the entire risk reduction credits program as it is. I think that it has been administered poorly. There are reports that people are getting credit for good time for merely applying for classes that they never serve in and so forth. And I feel much more comfortable with the entire program being eliminated. And as such, I have included that provision in my amendment. So my amendment includes the provision to remove and eliminate the risk reduction credit early release program in its entirety. Finally, I've made significant changes to the gun control subcommittee section. And essentially what I've done is I've removed anything that I feel is inappropriate based on the impact it's going to have on law-abiding citizens. It still contains many good provisions, and the ones that I think actually do something with regard to Sandy Hook. There is a prohibition on people listing anything other than their home residence on their pistol permit application. There are stricter mental health lookbacks. The statewide deadly offender weapon offender registry is still incorporated in this language. The language to expand safe storage and require that people that have a background of mental illness are included is also there. The increased penalties for firearms trafficking and straw purchases is included. And we've also added the reestablishment of the statewide firearms trafficking task force, which has been alluded to by some of my colleagues numerous times. And I believe that that is also something that has been successful in the past and would actually make an impact on keeping criminals and reducing quote-unquote gun violence. And finally, I included a credit if you purchase a gun safe, much like the tax credit that you would fill out on your state tax return for your home or your automobile. You can now write off the purchase of a gun safe too, which I think would be a good thing to encourage folks to do just that. So that's what's in it. What's not in it are bans on certain types of firearms based on their arbitrary cosmetic features. There are no bans on ammunition magazines, and there are no additional fees, licenses, or certificates for anything, to buy ammunition or otherwise. And there is no requirement to register something you already own. What it does not do is it does not make criminals out of law-abiding citizens.